to the crisis that's going on in Europe and Ukraine, given Trump's coming to power as the president in America. And we've seen all these events that have happened, you know, in the White House, in the Oval Office, this big row with, first of all, the visits of Starmer and Macron to try to get America to back off their position of abandoning Ukraine and effectively withdrawing in many ways from NATO and Europe. And they've and then the row they had with Zelensky on the final day. And now it seems that America has cancelled, you know, has halted all shipments of arms to Ukraine. They've also announced that they have forbidden Britain to give any intelligence, American intelligence information to Ukraine, which means that they're not doing it as well. So this seems to be quite a serious thing. And Trump, when he was questioned about this, has said that that despite the statement, the obsequious, fawning statement yesterday by Zelensky, where he basically apologized for what happened and said yes, he will do the mineral deal, and yes, he will enter peace negotiations, so on. Apparently, Trump doesn't believe him and has basically said that these shipments will be halted until he shows serious efforts at these peace negotiations, which we know he doesn't want peace negotiations. And he says he wants peace, but he's got all these conditions that Russia are not willing to meet. So let's open this up for discussion by comrades to see, or questions about the situation in Europe and Ukraine and the Trump situation vis-a-vis that. Any comrade like to say something, ask a question?
Sure. Well, I think, well, if I can give my 2 pence, 2 cents, 2 euros on this, look, I don't. Although I completely understand why Russia felt they needed what they needed to do with their special military operation, let's not even call it that, their war, their invasion of Ukraine. Although I completely understand why Russia felt the need to do it, I still don't support it because I think it's only further inflamed Russophobia, pro-NATO views, and so forth, to the point what Maria was describing in Romania. That is the universe that all of us in Europe live under when we talk anything about NATO, Ukraine, and Russia. There are no rational discussions to be had. The moment you start presenting the Russian point of view, the moment you start presenting objectionable facts and so forth, that it was the West, that it was the EU, that it was the US and Canada and whatnot that started this cluster, pardon my language, but this clusterfuck of a situation. It's like you're speaking Korean to a bunch of people who only who don't speak Korean, and it just doesn't get you anywhere. And it's very, very frustrating and very, very sobering. I understand Zelensky's point of view, and I also understand both Trump and J.D. Vance's point of view, in that 2 things. This war can't continue. Although if Europe really does want to continue this war, if Britain and Canada really want to continue this war, then they need to actually put some actual skin in the game, which is not just flooding Ukraine with weaponry, but actually send British troops, Canadian troops, French, German, whomever is a member of NATO that wants to, quote unquote, win this war into Ukraine and push Russian troops back into Russia. That's the only way Ukraine comes out winning. If the West isn't going to do that, then if the West isn't going to do that, even when the Americans cut and run and say, "Okay, we're done. We're done with this. We're having détente with Russia. Good luck." I mean, so I honestly don't get where the stand with Ukraine proud folks want. It's because they're clearly attacking Trump from the right, and that's not something that you should do. You should never attack somebody like Donald Trump from the right. They're making the same mistakes that the Democrats and so forth did the first time Trump was elected. For me, best case scenario, for me, a really good just peace is okay, Russia out of eastern Ukraine. East Ukrainians, their linguistic rights and so forth are all respected, and whatnot. And Ukraine has some kind of an arrangement like what Switzerland or what Spain has with the different linguistics groups. Ukraine doesn't become a part of NATO, has neutrality like what Switzerland has, like what Austria has, and that Ukraine has some kind of an EU trade deal in which you allow freedom of movement and stuff like that. I don't think the Russians can be so upset or threatened by that. And then that also gives Ukrainian businesses the right to continue with doing trade and whatnot with Russia, which they need to do. This idea that you cut off Ukraine, Serbia, Georgia, Bulgaria, and whatnot from doing any sort of trade or cultural stuff with Russia, I think is asinine. I think is so ridiculous. For me, that would be a just peace. Anything less than that, where you have East Ukraine sort of being partitioned into one or two countries, where it's either its own independent country, which is recognized by the international community, except for NATO and the EU members, or East Ukraine becomes just part of Russia, and then West Ukraine becomes part of NATO and the EU. That to me would be a tragedy. And knowing Ukrainians from the East who've lost family members from the Russian invasion, that would also be a humongous blow and trauma to them. So,
thanks, Yuri. Who else? Daniel, you got your hand up. Dan from Chile. I know Dan is outside, so he's. We're getting a very nice view of a green background there, trees and whatever.
He spills
so
right.
Yeah, Dan, go for it.
Yeah. And down by the yacht launching place. Yeah, just a couple of points. I think well, the war was provoked, and I think really Putin had no choice but to take the action he did, because the rest of Europe, the rest of NATO is just taking no notice whatsoever of Russia's security interests and the threat of Ukraine with its close links to Russia and historical and ethnic and so on. The threat of Ukraine joining NATO was just too much. It was just after all the expansion of NATO to the east. So I think it was justified, and well, we're here where we are, and in fact, I think from a military point of view, I think it is impossible for the Europeans on their own to continue the war. As I understand it, the Ukrainian military is totally dependent on US satellite communications for targeting and so on, their intelligence, or their satellite and military planes, spotter planes and so on. And in fact, I mean, if Elon Musk switched off Starlink, then my understanding is that the military communications just couldn't function, and that would be it. Okay.
Thanks, Dan. Another comrade. I'll call you in, Maria, a bit later if that's all right. Hope you don't mind. Anybody else who'd like to speak? Or Mike in USA, I think maybe you might have a point of view about this. Huh? Yeah, Mickey. Being as you're based in the US, you have a point of view about this?
Yeah. Oh, it's really, I just want to mention one thing to start with. It's very confusing here how many people who are on the left who are actually supporting the need for America and Europe to rearm, to militarize, Ukraine in its war with Russia. They keep the argument that they're using is that Russia is a bad guy. It's a threat. That Putin wants to take over. If they don't rearm Ukraine, Putin will then have an excuse and be able to invade the whole of Europe. I mean, this is what people on the left and in Britain even, the Stop the War movement are actually saying. So we got this really confused situation here where people on the right are supporting Trump peace initiative in Europe, and people on the left are actually taking a right-wing position in supporting the militarization of Europe. It doesn't just, it's like going back to the 19th century with the nation states all militarized and armed to the teeth. In my mind, it creates a foundation for wars to break out and fighting to break out between these different nations if we're not careful. It's like it's irrational. I think one way to look at this is really to go back, and I agree with what Dan was saying, that they were provoked. We go back to 2014 and what went on with the coup. The elected president in Ukraine was overthrown. It was part of an American plan to see an opportunity there for them to, establish themselves in a controlling position in Europe, I think. Their power is declining. So what better than to really get a foothold again, strong foothold in Europe by undermining like places like Georgia or even Romania or Bulgaria. And there we had a situation in Ukraine that erupted. And it was exploited, I think, by America for its own interests. And so the Orange Revolution, if you remember that took place. And then they overthrew the elected president had to get out of the country. But you know what was going on at that time? You had the Orange crowd were actually, supporting. They were faced with a choice. The population, and in the western half of Ukraine, you've got this population who were being propagandized to by advocates of the American dream and democracy and peace and security, and everything will be just great if we support more of a pro-European president, because we got a pro-Eastern Russian supporter as president now, and we don't. That'll only, and so the lie was all peddled towards the people that that's not the way you need to go, because that'll just lead to sort of increased poverty and unemployment and lack of democracy and freedom. They were being told that. But then the people in Crimea, the Tatars, and the people in Donetsk and the other areas of eastern Ukraine, they are Russian speaking and have a very strong affinity and connection to Russia. And so when they had a referendum, those people said, yeah, we would prefer to be in Russia. And the immediate consequence of that was, I think Zelensky was elected at that time, was to send in the military and ban the Russian language in the eastern half of Ukraine. It became very authoritarian, very dictatorial, very oppressive to the people in eastern Ukraine who were saying, hey, we see more benefits by coming under Russian control. We want to have an independent sovereign provinces within Ukraine, but under the authority of Russia. Well, the Ukrainian oligarchies said, oh, we're not having that. We're not going to lose the wealth that's available in that industrialized area of Ukraine. It's manufacturing, it's coal and all the minerals. And so they then immediately they went out and tried to oppress those people. And that went on for 8 years. And so Putin's sitting back there and he's thinking, my God, what's going on here? If this, and America's involved, and Ukraine to him then appears to be calling for membership of NATO, promises are being broken that America and the West would never support an expansion going eastward. And there it was, the promise was broken. The oppression of the Russian-speaking people was being done heavy-handedly in eastern Ukraine. And for all intents and purposes, I mean, if I was in Putin's place, I would have maybe done the same. You know, he said, like, it's too much of a risk, this. This is an encroachment on our sovereignty as a nation. And he was willing to reach out and have an agreement with the West in Minsk to sort of say, hey, you know, can't we settle this peacefully? He actually took a peaceful approach, but it was ignored offhand. And remember, then there was a point at which Zelensky and I think Putin had sort of sat down and sort of reached some compromise agreements in 2022, after the war had broken out. They were ready to reach agreement, and then Boris Johnson from Britain, with the encouragement of Joe Biden and the American establishment, goes over and tells Zelensky, you better, no, don't do that, because we will continue to support you. We'll continue to back up Ukraine, taking control over the whole of Ukraine, the authorities in Ukraine taking over the whole of Ukraine. And so Zelensky then bought that line. And that's where we are, I think, today. It's where Trump comes in and says, this is, he's not a neoconservative, it's neoliberal. He's saying, he's looking at it in black and white terms, I think, and saying, this is costing us too much money. We're throwing all this money into Ukraine, into a stalemate situation that's unwinnable. Ukraine cannot win this war, even with the amount of money and military hardware that's being put in there. And so, with his view that he wants to protect the business interests of America and his realization that it's too unstable a situation in Europe, he's taken the alternative approach from the neoconservatives and said, let's withdraw, let's get out of this, and let's sue for peace. So, and I think that's the situation today, in my opinion, and is that the left's position should be for peace and for advocating for the rebuilding and support for the Ukrainian people. So that, all the housing, a lot of the housing, they need to restore the democratic rights and the trade union rights and end martial law that's taking place. That is what needs to be done. And there needs to be some questions raised about
which are appropriate the occasion.
Which actually need to be addressed about the Nazification that's taken place within Ukraine, with the building, naming of streets after Nazis from the Second World War, putting statues up and so on. It's like the longer that war goes on, That's what you're gonna see that element emerging more and more. You're gonna see more and more dispossessed people in Ukraine wanting to get the hell out of it, and then more of a push by Zelensky to sort of press gang young men and women into the army. It's a crazy, no winnable situation. Ukraine.
Thanks, Mike. That was a very comprehensive background. Very good, very helpful. I was wondering if one of the Pakistani comrades would like to say something about how they see the European conflict developing. Either Sajjad or Khalid. One of you two comrades like to say something? Well, I mean, Mike, just on the factual thing, Zelensky was elected in 2019.
Okay.
So he wasn't in power earlier on, and in fact, ironically, he was elected on a peace platform, which was supposed to be the carrying out of the Minsk agreements, which had was offering Eastern Ukraine autonomy, full autonomy, which is what you kind of were referring to. So that was what. But he abandoned that program as soon as he was elected. So Maria, do you wanted to say something? Sorry.
No, I spoke too much. I understand.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So Yuri, come back. Oh, so Yuri, one thing before you come back, yes. I think that I mean I think that Russia that they should before they decided to invade, they should have gone for a massive international campaign to explain the situation in Ukraine and what was happening in the Donbass, that there was a civil war. Most people, when you talk to them about Ukraine, didn't know that there was a civil war going on before the invasion, and that there were a lot of people dying from it. 14,000 people, according to UN estimates, most of which, 80% of which, were on the Donbass side and not on the Ukrainian nationalist side, and that the Ukrainian nationalists were clamping down on their ethnic rights, not letting them get pensions, not letting them speak the language. They speak in Russian and so on.
Definitely.
So the thing was that they needed to go for a big campaign internationally in the UN and everywhere else to expose all this, but they didn't do that. So one of the big problems was that, if you're gonna take military action, it's got to be seen as the last resort.
Exactly.
And then when you do it, then everybody understands why you're doing it, and then you get a lot more public support internationally. So I think this is one of the things I criticize about Russia. But having said all that, what Yuri suggested about that the Russians would try, I think it's all gone way beyond that. Sadly I don't think that is the Minsk position that you're putting forward, which is sadly, I mean, I'm sure we'd all like to see that, but it just nobody can guarantee. They're asking for guarantees the Ukrainian side, but then they would want to be guarantees on the Donetsk and Luhansk side, on the Donbass side, which the Ukrainians would not. You couldn't trust them an inch that they wouldn't just go take back all the area and do the same thing, because these people sadly are fanatics. These Ukrainian nationalists. And they hark back and link back to the Nazis during the Second World War. So I don't think that is a viable thing. I think the reality is that we're going to have this country of Ukraine is going to be divided, and a sad result that it is. And there's nothing we can do about that. So we have to make the best of that situation.
That's very, very sad and tragic. And
it is,
tragic indeed. Which is why, which is why it's very important to emphasize that Western imperialism is literally the root of all evil. And if Ukraine is a divided country, you have to blame Western imperialism for that.
Sure. Mick,
Yeah,
you want to come
yeah.
back?
I don't want to lose, the other big issue that I see a lot here, and it's this, that the division that's actually taking place within the left over those who are supporting militarization and a continuation of the war from the left, and those who are opposed. They're opposed to Trump and his peace initiatives. It's really very confusing to me. I can't talk to people on the left about my particular views on Ukraine. They'll say you're a Putin puppet. If you kind of start trying to defend what's going on and take maybe a more neutralized, nuanced position and say you're an advocate for peace. Russia didn't start this war. It goes back. But that's not the expected thing to say now. And it's propagandized in the media. All of the Democrat politicians come out with this line about Putin being an authoritarian. Even Bernie Sanders called him a murderous dictator. And they're using this language, the language that they used against Trump in the campaign now, again, and they're using it to describe Putin. This is people on the left. And so there's a tremendous division of opinion here. I'm hoping it will gradually dissipate. But right now, it is a problem. It's a problem for me to go to a meeting of left-wing people.
I think, Mike, we're all experiencing this problem. Yeah. Well, Chris, would you like to say something? I'm going to call in Dan in a minute. Would you like to say something about?
Well, I would say in the UK, the position of the left isn't quite as bleak as that. Most of the left groups, the Trotskyist and Communist Party groups, don't support Ukraine and aren't calling for European army or militarization. And at the moment, the Stop the War Coalition UK is still firmly opposed to rearmament. So it's a little bit different here, but I expect that we'll slowly see remember the Stop the War Coalition UK is essentially Corbyn, Abbott, etc. Yeah, exactly. In essence, yeah. I suspect we'll slowly see them, wither to some kind of independent position. But at the moment, we haven't really got that same kind of problem with the left. The left is quite clearly identified with.
No, I mean, I would rather be in England right now than in Belgium and the Netherlands or any part of Eastern Europe, where you just cannot have the position that even somebody like a Corbyn has in the UK. It's terrible right now. Like from.
Okay, Yuri, thanks. Carry on, Chris. You were saying
Green parties.
Yuri, let Chris.
Well, no. I agree with Yuri. I mean, it's the same here. There is no official political party, including the Greens. Not that they're that radical. Actually, Greens Organised, which is a left-wing faction organised by ex-Marxists inside the Green Party, sort of practicing Trotskyist entryism inside the Green Party. They're firmly opposed to funding Ukraine and continuing the war. But essentially, you're absolutely right when it comes to the obviously mainstream political movements. And when Starmer addressed Parliament Tuesday in the debate, when Farage got up to speak, he was jeered by almost every MP on every side of the Commons. So I'm not for one moment suggesting that there's an open and frank exchange of views. But within the left itself, the Stop the War Coalition UK is firmly opposed to financing a European army, does not lay the blame on the Russian invasion on being some kind of Putin-esque neo-fascist invasion of expansionism. They point out the very criteria that Daniel was referring to earlier. And as I say, the majority of the left groups are firmly opposed to militarization, etc. However, obviously, I think we'll see in Parliament and the soft left, as Mike's already said, I think we'll slowly see them absorbed into some kind of EU defence project.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Dan, you had your hand up. Go for it. I think you're muted at the moment, Dan. Down in Chile. If you can unmute yourself, yeah? Yeah? Hello, Dan? Oh, good. Okay. Go for it, man. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm losing signal. I hope you can hear me.
We can, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we should recognize that on Ukraine, there's been the most fantastic barrage of propaganda from imperialism in general, NATO, all their media outlets, whatever, however liberal and so on they are. And I mean, there's been nothing like it since the worst days of McCarthyism in the 1950s. And so it's not surprising that the liberal left, or, you know, left-wingers who have not a real understanding of imperialism have been taken in by this. And I think it will be some time before we can draw the real conclusion that the people that have told you lies about Iraq and the people tell you lies about Ukraine. It may not be too long before we can see a change, because I think Trump is seriously intent on ending the war. He wants to concentrate on Asia, it seems a lot of people are saying, and this European war is to him a distraction, and he just wants to end it. And there are economic advantages for him and for US imperialism in Russia and Ukraine that the war is just preventing. So, as I said, I mean, I think he's serious. And if he is really serious about it, he will put the Europeans in line. Zelensky has already put himself on the right line, and so on. And then I think we can start. It might just be possible to start having some logical discussion with these people in the left that have just been overwhelmed by this absolutely overwhelming barrage of propaganda. Okay.
Just on what Dan was saying there, I think, yeah, Trump is also got this aim that he's declared, hasn't he, that he wants to try to split Russia from China, to do like a reverse Nixon, what Nixon did in the 1970s, where he was able to help China, link up with China against Russia. I mean, I don't think this is going to happen, and that's a whole other discussion we haven't got time to go into now.
May I just make a quick comment?
Yeah,
because there was something I forgot before. Some of us have spoken before about the clear toxification of Putin with the level of propaganda that other comrades such as Dan and Yuri have been describing. But a couple of interesting things. There's been some opinion polling in Britain, and in Britain now, most people associate Putin more with Trump and as an ally of Trump than with China. And in Australia, an opinion poll was published yesterday, which has Trump as the biggest threat to world peace, ahead of Russia and China. I just thought I'd like to throw in that the toxification of Putin is now being absorbed by the White House, and for that we should be very grateful.
Yeah, that's quite funny. So, I mean, one of the things that we here in Europe, that is a big question, is that there seems to be and I don't know, I think the majority of the public is now, they were in support of Ukraine, you know, with all the media campaign at the beginning. But I think that they're now bemused by, they're confused by the conflict. I think a lot of people go along with what Mickey was saying about how they don't see it as a winnable war. And therefore, I suspect a lot of people are not the elite and the journalists and the chattering classes, as they call them, which give this impression that there's this horror with Putin, with Trump wanting to end the war. But I think among ordinary people, that they have their practical attitude, well, if we can't win this war, what's the point of putting more good money after bad? And so I suspect there's probably a lot more people, ordinary people, who would probably think, well, that makes sense. The other side of it, though, is that the cost of this. Now, in Britain, the new Labour government, which doesn't seem very new anymore, but they only came to power last July, and are incredibly unpopular. And one of the things that started to make them unpopular was that they refused to lift the 2-children benefit cap, which means that larger families don't get any benefits, and it's causing a massive amount of child poverty. Now, to lift this cap would only cost £1.5 billion. The Labour government said that they couldn't afford this, that the state of the economy and the finances were not good enough. But when Ukraine comes along, or we talk about rearming, there's no problem. We can spend 2 billion here, 3 billion there, 1.5 billion there. It doesn't matter. You know, there's unlimited finances, and we can increase the share of the GDP can go up from 2 whatever it was, 2 or 2.3 up to 2.5, and then later it can go up to 3% of the whole GDP. Which is huge amounts of money, and the same they're pushing this across the whole of Europe. And van der Leyen talks about rearming Europe and so on. But the problem is that where's this money going to come from? It's got all these countries are in financial crisis. Their economy is stagnant or in recession. Governments are cutting. They haven't got money for this, that, and the other that the public need. They haven't even got money for investment, research, and development. I mean, for example, they came out, the European Commission commissioned a report on the state of the European economy and how it was going to get out of this mess, and how they were going to catch up with America, which is, America's got all the technology companies and Europe's got virtually none now. And so they commissioned this guy, Mario Draghi, who used to be the head of the central bank. And he did a big report, which I think was something like 400 pages, and where he analyzed where Europe was failing in technology, science, and all the rest of it, investment, manufacturing. And he identified the need to spend at least 400 billion euros to start to even make a dent in this problem. But all of that was just a couple of months ago. That's all going to go out the window because they're going to spend all the money on the arms. And the thing is that they've got this idea in their mind that the arms will stimulate production. But what they don't understand, this is production for what? It's production for arms and soldiers that don't have any use for anything else, and just to become rust eventually. They don't actually increase the wealth of society. So they're making the same mistake that America's made with its military industrial complex, of just wasting all this money at the expense of rebuilding industry and reindustrialization. So and what will happen is that they will make further cuts in people's living standards and social services and welfare services and all the rest of it. And there will come a point, I already saw on one of these programs in Britain, people raising this question, that we should be spending the money on our pensions and on our child benefit and on all these other things. And where is money going to come from? And then the answer by Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister of Britain, was said, "Oh, it's not a zero-sum choice. We can do both." But it is a zero-sum choice, as they made clear when they said they were going to increase the military budget to 2.5%. To pay for it, they cut back all the foreign aid around the world to 2.3%, and that was a direct correlation. So it is a choice they have to make, and the population, I think, is going to see this over time, maybe not straight away. as their living standards go down and the economy gets worse, then I think this is going to become very, very unpopular, and we should be prepared for that. You know,
the catchy slogan of the group here, Pat, that's opposing that is called "Bombs, Not Butter."
Yes.
I'm not sure it's going to catch on.
Yeah,
Mickey, go ahead, man.
I just want to I struggle trying to understand actually what's going on, and I would venture to say, if I look at the big picture, that there's a huge shift taking place in the capitalist class, and I don't want to be a conspiracist theory, but there's a shift taking place between those who and the political class that represents them. And it's all related to this decline in the ability of these billionaire classes to really continue to benefit and increase their wealth from the systems out there. America's in decline, a tremendous amount of debt. So the solution becomes a choice between, being in competition with the other emerging countries in the world and taking a militarized approach to establish positions in Europe and in the Far Eastern countries. To say if we controlled parts of Europe, we can say what we want, and they'll have to follow us. Then if we did it in the Indonesia and places like that in Asia, they could do the same, send the troops in, The other choice is somewhat to do with the way Trump is handling it, is to withdraw, is to isolate and withdraw and build up your internal structures to create what they think they can do. And that's a form of stability. As capitalism does not like instability. And the only way they address instability historically has been through military means. And so that's what I think we're faced with. It's this decline in the West's ability to continue as it's done for the last 200 years. And the response that they're taking to this decline, those in power, is a confusing one. They're not all unified on it. And I think that's where Ukraine, I think where the China issue all starts fitting in.
I think, Mike, you've done a good summary there, which is why we're in this group called People's BRICS.
Yes,
it's because I think the background to all of this is that the rise of China and the BRICS and so on it's like a dialectical relationship that on the other side, the old powers, the small number of countries that through their wealth and military strength dominated the world, are in serious decline. And all of what's happening, Trump is a symptom of that. The split between Trump's America and Europe is a symptom of that. So it's a kind of, as the peoples of the world, the global majority rise up and get stronger, inevitably the forces, the minority of the world who were the backbone of imperialism, are in decline, serious decline. And we're seeing all these things are features of that. So of course that's why we're in this project in the first place, and that's why I guess why we're discussing this.
Yeah,
I think that's enough. Is that, well, perhaps we can call it to a halt now, so we don't go on too long. Is everybody sorry?
Yeah, you didn't want to hear about Trump's State of the Union address?
No, let's not talk about it.
Okay.
I mean, I watched it, but
Oh, you got that. Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to talk specifically about Europe, you see, rather than
that's
in detail
right.
about
That's
America.
fine. Yeah.
You got four more years of Trump. There's still plenty of plenty of stuff to talk about with just him alone.
Yeah. In fact, they talk about Trump derangement syndrome.
Oh yes.
We've also got. I think we're also getting Trump exhaustion syndrome.
Well, it's actually the new epidemic here in America is Trump syndrome syndrome. It is, honestly.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. I don't know about you, but I thought it was so. I think our discussion about what's happening in Europe really brought up a lot of the issues. I mean, we couldn't be exhaustive because we've got obviously a huge amount of subject, but I think it was a great thing, and I think it'll make a good video. All right, everybody.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.